Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The night over Genoa City felt unusually heavy, as if the town itself sensed that a line was about to be crossed that could never be erased, and inside Billy Abbott's dimly lit penthouse, anger simmered with a quiet, dangerous intensity that had been building for months, perhaps years, ever since Victor Newman had once again proven that no matter how many lives he destroyed or laws he bent, he always seemed to walk away untouched, untarnished, untouchable, and Billy, pacing back and forth with a glass of untouched whiskey clenched tightly in his fist, replayed every memory like a reel of injustice, the deals Victor sabotaged, the people he manipulated, the threats whispered in dark corners, the lives ruined with a signature or a phone call, and standing across from him was Phyllis Summers, arms crossed defensively, eyes blazing with that familiar mix of defiance and fear, knowing exactly why Billy had summoned her and dreading the words she was about to hear, because when Billy finally stopped pacing and looked at her, his voice was low but razor-sharp as he told her that this was it. This was the final moment before Victor Newman either paid for everything or continued ruling Genoa City like a king above the law, and he didn't sugarcoat it, didn't soften the edges, instead telling Phyllis flat out that she was the key, that she had the access, the secrets, the history, the receipts that could finally bring Victor down. And this was her last chance to do the right thing to help put Victor Newman behind bars where he belonged. Phyllis scoffed at first, reminding Billy that she had been burned before for trusting him, burned for trying to play hero, and she knew better than anyone that going after Victor was like walking into a war unarmed, because Victor never lost, he retaliated, he destroyed, and he made sure the people who crossed him paid in blood, tears, and ashes, but Billy wasn't backing down, his voice rising as he reminded her of the countless victims Victor had left behind, the families shattered, the businesses ruined, the lies that poisoned generations, and he accused Phyllis of hiding behind fear while pretending she was strong, calling out her hypocrisy in a way that cut deeper than any insult, because it struck at the truth she tried so desperately to deny. That she had evidence, real evidence, not rumors or vendettas but documents, recordings, financial trails that proved Victor had orchestrated crimes that went far beyond corporate warfare, crimes that involved blackmail, obstruction of justice, and manipulation of law enforcement itself. Phyllis's bravado cracked as memories flooded back. Late-night conversations with Victor where he let his guard down just enough, encrypted emails she never deleted, a flash drive hidden away that she had sworn she'd never use because she knew unleashing it would ignite a firestorm she might not survive, and she demanded to know why Billy was so obsessed, why he couldn't just walk away and live his life, and Billy snapped back that he had tried, that he had rebuilt himself again and again, only to watch Victor reach out and crush something else he cared about. And this wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about accountability, about finally ending Victor's reign of terror before another generation paid the price. Across town, Victor Newman stood in his office at Newman Enterprises, staring out over the city he believed belonged to him, unaware that the walls were beginning to close in, or perhaps sensing it on some instinctive level as Nikki noticed his distraction and questioned him, only for Victor to brush her off with that familiar confidence, insisting that Billy Abbott was nothing more than a mosquito buzzing around a lion. But even Victor's words couldn't silence the unease creeping into his mind, because he knew Phyllis Summers, knew her volatility, her intelligence, her tendency to burn bridges when cornered, and the thought that she might finally turn against him planted a seed of paranoia he refused to acknowledge. Back at the penthouse, Billy pressed harder, telling Phyllis that if she walked away now, she would be choosing Victor's side forever, and that when the next scandal broke, when the next innocent person suffered, that blood would be on her hands too, and Phyllis exploded, shouting that Billy had no right to judge her, that he wasn't the one who would be hunted, threatened, isolated, and destroyed if Victor discovered her betrayal. But Billy countered that Victor already viewed her as disposable, that loyalty meant nothing to a man who saw people as chess pieces, and the silence that followed was deafening as Phyllis realized Billy wasn't wrong, that despite all the time she'd played Victor's game, he would never protect her if sacrificing her benefited him. And in that moment the balance shifted, the fear giving way to something else, resolve, anger, perhaps even a desperate hope that this time justice might actually win. Phyllis finally asked what Billy wanted, and when he told her he wanted everything, the evidence, the testimony, the willingness to stand up in court and look Victor Newman in the eye, she laughed bitterly, saying that once this started, There would be no turning back, no deals, no second chances, and Billy replied with the words that sealed their fates, that this was Victor Newman's last chance to face the law like everyone else, and Phyllis's last chance to decide who she really was. The following days unfolded like a ticking time bomb as Phyllis secretly gathered files, decrypted old drives, and replayed recordings she had buried deep, each revelation confirming that Victor's crimes ran deeper than even Billy suspected, while Victor, sensing betrayal, began tightening his grip on those around him, issuing veiled threats, manipulating allies, and quietly preparing countermeasures, convinced that no one would dare challenge him openly, especially not Phyllis, the woman he believed he still controlled. When Billy finally handed the evidence to a federal investigator, knowing full well the consequences if Victor traced it back to them, the gravity of their actions settled heavily on both of them, and when the arrest warrant was finally issued, sending shockwaves through Genoa City, Victor's fury was volcanic, his betrayal cutting deeper than any business loss as he realized that Phyllis Summers had crossed the ultimate line, and as sirens echoed and the empire he built on fear and power began to crack, Billy stood beside Phyllis, knowing there would be fallout, knowing Victor would fight with everything he had, but also knowing that for the first time in a very long time, the man who believed he was untouchable was finally facing something he couldn't buy, threaten, or manipulate his way out of: justice. And as Genoa City braced for the aftermath, one truth became undeniable: nothing would ever be the same again. In the aftermath of the arrest warrant that rippled through Genoa City like an earthquake, the illusion of Victor Newman's invincibility shattered in real time, and yet even as federal agents moved with precision and purpose, Victor himself refused to bend, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with cold fury as he was escorted through the halls of Newman Enterprises under the stunned gazes of employees who had once believed he was untouchable, and though cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions that cut like knives, asking about corruption, blackmail, and obstruction, Victor offered nothing but silence, because in his mind this was not the end but the opening salvo of a war he intended to win. Meanwhile, Phyllis Summers sat alone in her hotel suite, curtains drawn, phone buzzing non-stop with messages she refused to answer, her hands trembling as the reality of what she had done settled in, knowing that no matter how justified her actions were, she had just declared open season on herself, and every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, to protect herself before Victor retaliated. Yet she stayed, replaying Billy's words in her head, reminding herself that fear had ruled her choices for far too long. Billy, on the other hand, wore a mask of determination as he faced the backlash from every corner of Genoa City, from those who applauded him for finally standing up to Victor to those who accused him of lighting a match in a room filled with gasoline. And, as Jack confronted him with concern etched deep into his face, warning him that Victor never forgave and never forgot, Billy simply replied that living under Victor's shadow was no life at all, and if this was the price of freedom, he was willing to pay it. Behind the scenes, Victor wasted no time assembling his counterattack, calling in favors, leveraging secrets, and planting seeds of doubt about the legitimacy of the evidence against him, insisting that Phyllis had fabricated documents and manipulated recordings out of spite, and as whispers began to circulate questioning her credibility, Phyllis found herself once again painted as the villain, her past mistakes dragged into the spotlight as if they erased the truth she now carried. And it was in that moment she realized the cruel genius of Victor Newman. Even in chains, he controlled the narrative. When Billy confronted Phyllis with the rumors, demanding to know if there was anything in her past that could undermine the case, Phyllis snapped, accusing him of trusting the system more than he trusted her, reminding him that Victor had spent decades rewriting history to suit his needs. And though the argument burned hot and fierce, it ended with a fragile understanding that they were now bound together, whether they liked it or not, because if Victor destroyed one of them, the other would fall soon after. As court proceedings loomed, Genoa City became a battleground of loyalties, with Nikki torn between loving the man Victor had once been and reckoning with the monster he had become, her anguish palpable as she begged Victor to take responsibility, only to be met with his unwavering belief that this was all a conspiracy orchestrated by the Abbotts and fueled by Phyllis's obsession. And when Nikki visited Phyllis in a rare moment of vulnerability, the tension between them was electric as Nikki demanded to know if Phyllis had ever cared about the collateral damage, about the families that would suffer if Victor went to prison, and Phyllis, tears brimming in her eyes, responded that those families had already suffered under Victor's reign, including her own, and someone had to stop the cycle. As the trial date approached, Billy uncovered another layer of Victor's crimes, evidence suggesting that Victor had interfered with witnesses in unrelated cases years earlier, prompting Billy to push harder, knowing this could be the final nail in the coffin, but also aware that exposing it would escalate Victor's retaliation to unprecedented levels, and sure enough, threats began arriving. Anonymous messages, silent warnings, reminders that Victor's reach extended far beyond the courtroom, forcing Phyllis to confront her deepest fear that this fight might cost her everything. Despite the danger, Phyllis refused to back down, testifying before a grand jury with a strength that surprised even herself, her voice steady as she recounted the manipulation, the coercion, and the crimes she had witnessed. And when Victor locked eyes with her across the courtroom, the betrayal between them crackled like lightning, his glare promising vengeance even as the walls closed in around him. Outside the courthouse, Billy watched, torn between pride and terror, knowing that no matter the verdict, there would be no winners in this war, only survivors. And as the judge denied Victor bail, citing the overwhelming evidence and the risk of interference, a gasp rippled through the courtroom, marking the first time in memory that Victor Newman was truly powerless. Yet even behind bars, Victor continued to play his game, reaching out to allies, manipulating situations with whispered words and calculated moves, while Billy and Phyllis struggled to reclaim pieces of their lives that had been consumed by the fight, their bond deepening into something complicated and fragile, built not on romance but on shared trauma, and an unspoken understanding that they had crossed a line together that could never be uncrossed. When a mysterious leak suddenly called the legality of the evidence into question, threatening to have the case dismissed, Billy realized with horror that Victor had anticipated every move, and the pressure mounted as the possibility of Victor walking free loomed once more, forcing Billy and Phyllis to confront the ultimate question: how far were they willing to go to ensure justice prevailed? As Genoa City held its breath, alliances shifted, secrets exploded, and long-buried truths surfaced. One reality became clear: Victor Newman's fall, whether temporary or permanent, had already changed the city forever, and as Billy and Phyllis stood on the edge of the storm they had unleashed, they knew that whatever came next, redemption, ruin, or revenge, would define them for the rest of their lives, because in Genoa City, power never disappeared, it simply changed hands, and this time, the cost of holding it was higher than ever before. As the legal storm surrounding Victor Newman grew darker by the day, Genoa City found itself gripped by a suffocating tension that seeped into every boardroom, living room, and whispered conversation, because even from behind reinforced glass and steel bars, Victor's presence loomed like a shadow that refused to fade. And Billy Abbott began to understand that taking down a man like Victor was never a single battle but a war fought on 1,000 invisible fronts, each one designed to exhaust, intimidate, and ultimately break those who dared challenge him. And nowhere was that pressure felt more acutely than by Phyllis Summers, whose once defiant resolve was now tested daily by isolation, suspicion, and the creeping realization that she had become the most dangerous woman in Genoa City simply by telling the truth. As Victor's legal team launched a ruthless campaign to discredit her, digging up decades-old scandals, missteps, and personal betrayals, the media gleefully painted Phyllis as an unstable opportunist seeking revenge rather than justice, and each headline felt like another knife twisting into her resolve. Yet even as doubt threatened to overwhelm her, she refused to recant, refusing to give Victor the satisfaction of watching her crumble. Billy, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning as his once clear sense of righteousness began to blur under the weight of consequences he hadn't fully anticipated, because every move he made now sent shockwaves through his family, forcing Jack to defend the Abbott name in public while privately questioning whether Billy's crusade had crossed into obsession. And when Victoria confronted Billy, accusing him of destroying her family under the guise of justice, the raw pain in her voice struck him harder than any threat Victor had ever made, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth that even the most justified war left innocent casualties in its wake. Behind the scenes, Victor escalated his retaliation with surgical precision, arranging for key witnesses to mysteriously recant, planting seeds of doubt among federal prosecutors, and leaking carefully curated information that suggested Billy himself had manipulated evidence. And as subpoenas began to circle closer to Billy's inner circle, the tables appeared to be turning, with Victor once again positioning himself as the victim of a vendetta-driven conspiracy. Phyllis, sensing that Victor's strategy hinged on isolating her from Billy, found herself increasingly cut off, even from those she once trusted, as friends distanced themselves out of fear of being pulled into the fallout. And it was in those lonely moments that the true cost of her decision became painfully clear, because standing against Victor Newman didn't just threaten her life or freedom, it threatened her very identity, stripping away the persona she had carefully built to survive in Genoa City, and forcing her to confront who she was without alliances, manipulation, or escape routes. As pressure mounted, Billy and Phyllis were drawn closer together not by romance but by a shared understanding that no one else could truly grasp the magnitude of what they were facing, and late-night strategy sessions blurred into moments of raw vulnerability as they admitted fears they'd never voiced aloud, including the terrifying possibility that Victor might actually win, that the system might bend once more in his favor, and that everything they had sacrificed would be for nothing. The breaking point came when a surprise court motion threatened to suppress a significant portion of the evidence Phyllis had provided, citing questionable acquisition methods, and as the judge considered the argument, Victor's smug confidence returned in full force, his gaze locking onto Phyllis with a chilling certainty that this was the moment she would finally break. Yet instead of retreating, Phyllis made a decision that would redefine the entire case, choosing to reveal a final, devastating truth she had kept hidden even from Billy. A secret recording that not only implicated Victor in multiple felonies but also exposed a network of enablers who had protected him for years. A revelation that sent shockwaves through the courtroom and forced the prosecution to expand the scope of the case overnight. The fallout was immediate and explosive, triggering internal investigations, resignations, and arrests that proved Victor's empire was built on far more than fear alone. And, as his allies began to fall, Victor's fury turned inward, his confidence cracking for the first time as he realized that Phyllis had not only betrayed him but outmaneuvered him, striking at the very foundation of his power. Yet even as Victor's grip weakened, the danger intensified, with anonymous threats escalating into real-world consequences, forcing Billy and Phyllis into protective custody, and pushing them to confront the possibility that Victor's reach extended beyond legality into something far more primal and dangerous. As the trial resumed under heightened security, Genoa City watched with bated breath as the man who once ruled their lives was forced to answer for his actions, and when Victor finally took the stand, his testimony was a masterclass in deflection and manipulation, weaving half-truths and calculated denials designed to confuse and distract. But for the first time it wasn't enough, because the weight of evidence and the courage of those who stood against him had shifted the balance irrevocably. Billy, sitting behind Phyllis as she listened to Victor's words, felt the full gravity of the moment settle over him, realizing that no matter the verdict, the illusion of Victor Newman's absolute power had been shattered forever, and that in exposing him, they had also exposed the fragile, corrupt systems that allowed men like Victor to thrive unchecked. As closing arguments approached and the city braced for a verdict that would define generations, Billy and Phyllis stood at a crossroads, aware that even victory would come at a devastating cost, because Genoa City never truly forgave those who changed the rules, and as the walls closed in on Victor Newman, one truth became undeniable. This wasn't just the end of an empire, it was the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape every relationship, every loyalty, and every life touched by his shadow. And as the final chapter loomed, the question was no longer whether Victor would fall, but whether anyone would survive the aftermath of his downfall intact. As the courtroom emptied and the judge ordered a brief recess before the verdict was read, the air around Billy and Phyllis felt thick with anticipation and dread, because they both knew that the next words spoken from the bench would echo through Genoa City for decades to come. And as Victor Newman was led back to his seat, his expression remained unreadable, yet his clenched jaw betrayed a man fighting the realization that control was finally slipping through his fingers, while Phyllis closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying her breath and reminding herself that no matter what happened next, she had already reclaimed a piece of her soul by refusing to stay silent. And Billy, watching her with a mix of admiration and fear, understood that this battle had changed them both forever, stripping away illusions and exposing raw truths that could never be buried again. Outside the courthouse, rumors swirled, alliances trembled, and families waited in agonizing suspense, knowing that a single decision would either restore Victor Newman to his throne or seal his fall. And as the bailiff called the court back to order, the weight of history settled over everyone present, because in that moment justice and power stood face to face, and only one of them was about to walk away victorious.